Sorry, is this okay for everyone? Not too loud? It's good. Okay. Going into season 2, there is the continued responsibility to represent the source material as loyally as possible and to do justice to it. And for me, that was trying to bring as much of the book Geralt into the show as much as Lauren's vision would allow. So I campaigned very hard to have him be a bit more verbose, to represent the intellectual from the books, the man who is wise, the man who has a philosophical lean, and the emotional depth to make him more of a three-dimensional character than was provided in season 1. Well, one of the interesting things about Geralt is that while in this season we might see a different side of him, he has always been that protector at heart. He's always had that as his natural core, and his experiences through life and his interactions with people have caused that to regress a little bit. And unfortunately, every time he does try and protect people, he ends up getting himself in some rather nasty trouble, as we saw in Blaviken, for example. Despite having the best interests at heart, he ended up killing a whole bunch of people and then being hated for it. And so Geralt's always had that natural protector lean. But now with Cirilla in his life, it's almost like a key to unlock him, to allow him to be that protector for someone so close to him, and he can finally be himself.
So, right to the very beginning, how do you find appealing this project, and why do you decide to come on board?
For this, well, I sought this out very, very hard. I chased this down before it was even a thing. And I had heard whispers that Netflix had bought the IP, and I then chased and eventually we got in touch and they said, we haven't got a show running yet, but when the time comes, we'll contact you. And then I met Lauren when she was hired, and then shortly after that, Lauren actually said to me, she said to my agents, not to me, you're probably not the right guy for the role, we're going to keep on looking out here, and I didn't get it. But so much was my passion for this, is that even when weeks later they then contacted me and said, hey, do you want to audition for this? And my agent said, look, you don't have to audition. I said, absolutely, I will. This is something which I really, really want. And the reason why I want that is because, my first introduction was, I'm so sorry, this is a long translation for you. My first introduction was the Witcher games. And the world they created there, the world that CD Projekt Red created, was fitting, I later discovered, to the books. It was rich, nuanced, had a lot of great morality, and obviously as a game player you can make your own choices, but the world around you was wonderfully Sapkowskian, and I didn't realise that at the time until I read the books, and absolutely loved them, and the nuance, the complexity to all these characters was even deepened, and I couldn't help but think this is absolutely a role I must play, to see these rich characters, especially in Geralt, who is up front can be considered one thing, and then the more you learn about him, the more you realise he's an extraordinarily special person in intellect, wisdom, and as I said before, his philosophical lean. But he did seem somewhat hard in his decision making. And then in Blood of Elves, you discover he is this extraordinary character who, despite a somewhat seeming hard line with his educating of Cirilla, especially his line of neutrality, you then learn that it's all for a reason, and these reasons are actually really, really kind reasons and gentle reasons. When he turns down Triss in the books, he then she falls very ill, and on this caravan he is taking care of her as if he were a nurse. And it is extraordinary to see this, extraordinary to see the depth of this character. And having that, realising what that was, it was something which I thought I absolutely must play this character. And obviously was heartbroken when I was told I was not going to play him. But then had another opportunity. and leapt at it when they asked me to audition.
Sorry, when you mentioned the games, you mean the video games?
Yes, Phew. Well, I don't want to give anything away about Yennefer as such, because her storyline is quite different from the book, so there'll be lots of surprises there. It's a lot of original story. However, I can say that Anya has done an extraordinary job, and her performance is really quite spectacular. And when it comes to Cirilla, she's coming to terms with this power that she's discovered, and within her, she has no idea what it is, but she also has to come to terms with the idea of allowing this stranger who, in the show, she's never met before, and allowing him to protect her, and for her to trust him purely on the word of her grandmother. So for her, that's a big leap. But again, Freya has done an absolutely incredible job. There's some wonderfully emotional performances in there, and some lovely subtleties as well. And it was a real pleasure working with her, and I think she's going to do really well. Thank you. I am by no means the best versed of people out there. There are some people who know the Witcher lore inside and out. I am familiar with it. I've read the books, obviously, and I love the books. And also coming from a lover of fantasy background, it really helps me have an understanding of the nuance and the complexity of these things. And as far as the fans go, I do read what they say. I think it's very, very important to do so, all the way from the overwhelmingly positive to the overwhelmingly negative. And one can separate the destructive criticism from the constructive criticism. And I think it's important to read those. I really take a lot of note, because there's a lot of people out there who really do know the lore exceptionally well, and I'll read certain things. I'll like, that's a pretty good point, actually. That is something which should be done. And I know when it came to the choices in season 1, it was my choice to be more quiet rather than more verbose. That's something which I definitely read and listened to, because even though I knew Geralt was far more verbose, if the opportunity isn't there, it was all about trying to make Geralt seem like the intelligent person who he was in the books, rather than short bits of dialogue which didn't really represent that. And I chose quietness over the, and again, I didn't even cut that much, just little bits. When someone says how they feel, I thought if Geralt says nothing, and maybe the well-known grunts or hmms, and sometimes the occasional F word, people can take from that what they will. But when it came to season 2, I thought, right, clearly this is something which has not been picked up on enough by the old school fans, the people who have loved these books for many, many years. And I wanted to make sure that they felt heard and they felt listened to. And so as much as within my power, I've tried to do that. Obviously, there's only so much I can do. I can't put in swathes of dialogue, and the storyline, the plot line is what it is, and it's sad. But it is important to me that I read those things and listen to them, as long as the criticism is constructive rather than destructive. And when it is destructive, it's obvious. It is to a degree. I mean, there's obviously the work one does in preparation for fitness and aesthetics, but also there is the sword fighting element of it and the fighting element. Certainly, I've done this sort of thing before, but it requires, certainly for season 1, a refresh, and to find Geralt's style and pattern of fighting. Within the books, there are descriptions of how he fights, but it tends to be a lot of pyramids, And while I think pirouettes do look fantastic, there must be more as well. And I've worked very hard with various people to try and find my own style in that. So it's not just copying someone else's style, and it looks particular to Geralt. And certainly working with Wolfgang Stegemann, who I did the season 1, episode 1 fight, the Blaviken fight with. It was incredibly helpful because we could work with some traditional things and also add a fantasy element to them as well. I think it's always tough to be aware of the influence one has on people, especially children, until you meet the people who say that one has had an influence. But I do think it is important, certainly when it comes to physical health. We have so much more knowledge out there now, and it's more accessible. And for me, looking after my state of mind and remaining positive, it really does help to be physical. Whatever my goals may be, trying to achieve something, or staying fit, or trying to get fit again after an injury, or working through an injury, have been incredibly beneficial. It does help teach one that limits are often mental rather than physical, and that's one step to victory, in my opinion. And so if there are young people out there who are listening and who that affects positively, then that makes me a very happy man. How I got into the world was definitely my father. And I have very fond memories of begging him for my first PC, and then I was not the only one with a PC in the house. He had one too. My brothers had them as well, and we used to play. We had LAN parties in the house, which was local area network parties, which is you literally plug the computers into each other, and then you play the games with each other on different computers. The precursor to online gaming. Really, it was just network gaming, and I fell in love with them. It was a wonderful place for my imagination to blossom, and the limits of that to be expanded. And it's always been something I've enjoyed. I enjoy it in my free time, when I have free time, which seems to be less and less these days, which is wonderful. But I do try and carve time out just so I can escape into these worlds again, because game developers are so talented in what they do. I don't know how they turn code into the things they turn them into, the incredible visuals and the things we can do, but it seems like magic. And to be stuck in those worlds, well, not stuck in those worlds, to choose to be in those worlds and to have, as I say, the barriers of your imagination expanded is a wonderful privilege, and I'm glad we have that to do. It's both a privilege and a responsibility, but a responsibility first. And that part is important to me because, as I've said before, these characters are beloved, and I want to make sure that at least a majority can see the character in live action when I'm the custodian of these characters, and be content, if not happy. If they are happy, brilliant, and that's the most important thing for me. It's a responsibility, but also a privilege, because I'm a fan of these characters myself, so the opportunity to wear their boots is very exciting. Well, I mean, it couldn't be. Both characters are representations of good. Superman is vast in his power, and Geralt is not as vast. Certainly, I think with extraordinary amounts of prep, and with Superman giving him a window because of his personality and character, Geralt might be in with a sliver of a chance, but with Superman, if he didn't have, I mean, the great thing about Superman is his character, it's his personality, it's the ideals that he represents. Superman, categorically. Yes, I did injure myself. It was a rather nasty hamstring tear, grade 2B for anyone who knows anything about them. And the recovery, thankfully, I had a wonderful physiotherapist in Freddie Murray, and he basically, the long story short, after getting off crutches, and even while I was on crutches, he would be coming in almost every day to make sure the muscle was worked in the right way, not taxed, but worked, and make sure the scar tissue was forming in the way that he wanted it to form. And then when I was on my feet again and shooting, we would be up before dawn and before the workday started to make sure we got in about an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours worth of physiotherapy, and then get to work. And doctor's orders were to stay, to be on my feet for no longer than 5 hours a day, and unfortunately that's not how filming works. And so there were some days where I was only on my feet for 5 hours, and there were other days where it was 6 or 7. Freya was a trooper during this period, because the days that I was on my feet only for 5 hours, she was taking the brunt of the work as well. And it's a real sign of character to do that, because those days get long, especially when you have wigs to wear and put on beforehand as well. And so my hat is off to Freya, certainly. But the recovery took a while. I wasn't fully recovered really until maybe mid-May, and I injured it in November, as much as the hamstring healed, because it wasn't focused healing. It was while I was working, and then other injuries were happening because of that, because we were trying to get back to do a certain scene, which I injured my hamstring first on. But that's just the way it works sometimes. And this time, and this is thankfully the worst injury I've had to date, and hopefully nothing as bad happens again. Unfortunately, with hamstring tears, if one isn't careful, they can sometimes have a higher chance of repeating themselves. But thankfully, as I said, with Freddie Murray being my physiotherapist, we are fully and properly healed, and that won't happen again. I mean, the show certainly draws from the books. Lauren has created a lot of original story, and she also pulls some things from the games as well. But I wouldn't say they're based more on one or the other. This is a lot of it's Lauren's version of the story. When it comes to the video games, is there anything I have tried to include in the show? I think, it's, while I definitely, I'm obviously influenced by the video games in some way, shape or form, because they were my first introduction to it, my focus really has been the books, and trying to bring as much of book Geralt to the show, as much as I'm allowed. And I suppose from the games you get to see a visual aspect of the fighting style, but I've also tried to make that my own if I can. But the signs, I suppose, there's a lot of sign use of his magic in the games, and not so much in the books. And so I've definitely added that to the show, because I wanted to show him using his full suite of abilities, rather than just limited to swordplay, because there is a huge fan base out there who are gamers and whose fandom is based upon the games, and so to not include that, I feel would be a sad omission. And you now have my full attention.
Toda mi atención ya.
Creo hay tiempo para una pregunta más, me parece.
Well, yes, certainly some have become that way for a reason. Others are just born that way. That is the nature of what they are. They are just like a tiger could be considered a monster. And these monsters have all come onto this particular sphere because of the conjunction of the spheres. And some are natural to that world, but others have been introduced during the event called the conjunction of the spheres. For me, the really interesting monsters are the ones that look like monsters, but are quite the opposite. They are called monsters by humanity, or by elves, by gnomes and dwarves, because they are different and seen as dangerous. In fact, Geralt is often called a monster, and they are anything but on the inside. And also interesting is that people are often the greater monsters than the monsters themselves, and that's something which I really enjoyed in Sapkowski's novels, and it's something that I hope we explore some more. You're very welcome. Is that all the questions? Is that all we have time for? Okay. I just want to make sure that everyone got to... Yeah, okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. That's all the questions. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope to see you all again soon. Hopefully next time this comes around, whether it be for something else or whether it be for this, I hope that we can all be without our masks and we can all have a proper chat in person. Thank you.